Welcome back to the Fit Minute Podcast, where we talk all things health, fitness, and lifestyle. I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome back to the Fit Minute Podcast, Fitness for Real People. I'm your host, Gabby Mazar, and on today's episode, I have Dana Frosch. She is a body, mind, and spirit alchemist. She coaches women to optimal health. Welcome to the show today.
Thank you, Gabby. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes. So tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what you do.
Yeah. Okay, Gabby. So I have many different roles that I play, but I am a Midwesterner at heart. I was born and raised in the Midwest. I had a gypsy spirit. I was able to move and live abroad for 10 years with my family. So that's a little bit of a prefacing. I live both in Chicago and Miami Beach. So my work, I started out as a social worker by education, and then, we moved abroad and we left the US with 3 children. And while we were living in Brazil, we had always had this vision to adopt. And so we ended up adopting 2 children while living in Brazil. And through the adoption, I decided to hire a life coach and just to help me with the transition. And it was so transformational for me that instead of pursuing, a higher degree beyond my bachelor's, I decided to do my coach training. So I started as a life coach while living abroad in 2000 and end of 2006, beginning of 2007. And the process was so transformational for people these women were making big life changes. And so I did my master coach training with it's Dr. Martha Beck is who trained me as a life coach. And so I've had this coaching practice for, since then, a number of years. Fast forward, we returned to the US, and I'm kind of going into my story, but just to kind of preface you, I've been back in the US since the end of 2008. We went to Switzerland for 6 months in between South America and returning to the US. And I would love to share my health story, but once we returned to the US a few years later in 2011, I had a health crisis, which really took me down this journey of a healing journey. And then because of that, I started studying nutrition from the functional lens. And that's when I added the health coaching component into my practice. So I've been in the field for a number of years.
Before we get into the nutrition part and the health crisis, what made you decide to go to a life coach in the first place when you were in Brazil?
That's such a great question because, back then it wasn't as well known. When I became a life coach, people were like, what is that? And, there was an education piece to explain exactly what a life coach is. Well, I had a friend, a very dear friend who had done her coach training, and she was a life coach. And she said, as I was sharing with her some of my challenges in the adoption process, she said, you should hire me. The tools that I'm using, they're really going to help you. And it was expensive, Gabby, because we did not have the internet. Yes, it was different. It was a different world back then. I was calling from Brazil to the US. So I had phone fees, and I basically could afford to meet with her once a month. And I will tell you, I did my work. I showed up, I listened, I took on the tools, I did the work, and then we would meet again in a month. And it really it made a profound impact in my life. I felt, even though it was a really challenging time, I felt my own power internally to really rise up and also just to metabolize the transition and the changes in my own life. So that's why I hired one.
Yeah, you needed help.
Yes.
I think we all need help at some point. We all need help all the time, right? But I don't think we decide to get help is the problem. And then we kind of get into this place where we're, up a creek and we don't know where we're going or what direction we need. And then until we're in dire need and then we're in a really bad place, right?
Yeah.
So you're in the US now. You have your life coaching certificate. You have 4 kids at this point, right? And then 5 kids at this point.
5.
And now you go through this health crisis. Tell us that story.
Yeah.
What happened? What were you going through?
Yeah. So I want to preface that there was this decade before that, in that adoption transition, and stress is really how we read what's happening in our life, because two people can have the same experience and their mind body system reads it very bio individual, is what I like to say. And so the reading, how I was translating the things that we were going through as a family, and even just moving. I mean, an international move is a really big life event. So we went from Brazil, where we had lived, we were in Latin America for 10 years. We were in Brazil for 8 years. We loved Brazil. We loved the culture. And then we moved to Switzerland, and honestly, it just wasn't a good fit. It wasn't a good fit for our family. And it was very stressful. And so, you know, the things, and then we moved back to the US. And when we moved back to the US, there was a lot of heavy lifting, because I had raised an international family. And so then we were coming back to the US, where, most of us were Americans, but we had a real reverse culture shock experience. And my husband was gone a lot of the time working. And so there was heavy lifting just to help the family adapt to their home in the US. And so, there were several things, like adoption is a big life event. These international moves are big life events. Moving back to the US, where you think it's your home, but I had never lived in Chicago, and I felt very foreign. Like, the way I did life with my family was very different than how other people were doing life with their families. And so, there was this stress, and there were signals that my body gave me over that 10-year period, like a cough that I couldn't, a cough that took me to the emergency room. That was the vagus nerve. That was my nervous system just feeling that stress. And I wasn't consciously aware how to metabolize how my body was dealing with the stress that I was under. So, fast forward, we're living back in the US, we're doing life. So we moved back at the very end of 2008. And 2011, I can remember being really tired. So at that time, my oldest daughter was a senior in high school. And then I had, like, they're about 2 years apart. So, there was a lot going on in my life. And if we talk about, like, you're a fitness podcast, right? So it's about fitness. And I've always believed in fitness. Well, I was doing a boot camp every morning at 5:30. And I was, I love the boot camp, but actually later what I would learn, it was working against me, because I was already tired. I didn't need that hard workout. And I find that most women, they go too hard. When they think they're taking care of themselves, they work too hard. So I thought, I'm taking care of myself. So I have this, just so you know, like, I'm doing the boot camp, I'm coaching, I'm working, I'm, taking care of my family, and I'm feeling this fatigue, and I just think it's stress. My daughter graduates from high school. We take this family trip to Turkey. And I remember, Gabby, so many times when we were traveling, I was behind my family. I was tired, and I would, like, oh, can we just sit? I just want to rest for a few minutes. And that wasn't me. That's not like my typical way of wanting to rest every few minutes, but I couldn't keep up. And I still didn't get, maybe something's wrong. So we go back, but I would just share that, so that the listeners know, because I think for women, so many times we don't listen to some of those cues. Even though I was a coach and I knew the body, I still teach the body compass. But there are so many things that we chalk up to stress, and we think, oh, we'll deal with that later. And that's where I was, because I was very busy. So one day in July in 2011, I had a friend visiting with her children. We took this beautiful walk to the beach, and I literally couldn't keep up with her. I sent her on ahead of me, and I said, I'll meet you at home. I'm just going to take my time. It's a hot summer day. We get home, we go to a museum with our children. We come home. I'm really hungry, and I just am so focused. I'm going to get guacamole before we make dinner. And I stabbed my finger with a knife. I stabbed in between my index and middle finger with a knife, and split right in the middle. So I did what a lot of women do. I'm like, I want to feed everybody first. I'll go to the ER to fix this later. This is very common. I'm not alone in this sentiment. So I did just that. I taped it up. I fixed it all up. I finished. I made the guacamole. We all wait. And I'm like, oh, let me just call the emergency room and see if they're busy. These are the things that women do. We're so focused on other people. And so I called the ER. They're like, no, we're not busy. So I go over to the ER and my heartbeat. So, when you go into ER, you have your intake nurse. That's the first stop. You stop with the intake nurse. She does all the vitals. My heartbeat is 36 beats per minute, which is way too low for your average woman. At the time I was 45, I'm 56 now, way too low. And she is concerned. And so at that point, the finger is nothing. I needed a tetanus shot. They quickly did that. But the cardiology team came in and trying to figure out what was happening. So I was admitted to the hospital, and eventually, just to fast forward, they ruled everything out, and it was a worn out body part. The electrical conduction of my heart had simply worn out, and there was no reason other than, as you would find in a 70, 80-year-old woman, but our body parts do wear out. So they implanted the pacemaker, and my electrophysiologist said, you are going to feel like your old self again. But I didn't. I was still just as tired. So at that point, my heart was pacing, so there was no danger, but I was still just as tired. And he said, the electrophysiologist said, it's in your head, you're fine. This is just, everything's fine. This is in your head. You just need to calm down. But I was like, internally, I knew that wasn't really the case. I knew myself too well. So I went searching online to figure out, and I did, by the way, I was admitted to the hospital, so they did all those labs. So I could see that I was pre-diabetic. So I went to the endocrinologist. In conventional medicine, they don't do a lot for prediabetes. But because diabetes is a strong gene, every adult on my father's side has it, and then it moves into adult onset obesity. And I had started gaining weight at that point too. So I was just curious for myself that something's just not quite right. And I wasn't satisfied with what the endocrinologist said. I knew that there was more. So I started reading about diet, and I found a book, When the Heart Speaks, by a female cardiologist. And that's where that book really resonated with me, because she talked about there are these emotional connections when your heart isn't working functionally, even if it's cholesterol, like these emotions impact the function of the heart. And it's a real invitation to look at what is going on. So in that book, she introduced a breathing techniques. It's actually a research out of California called Heart Math. It's just like it sounds, heart plus the word math. And they have researched the impact of heart rate variability. That's the electrical conduction of your heart, right? So that was my issue. They researched heart rate variability and the emotional connections because of the heart-brain connection through the vagus nerve. And they have created these breathing techniques that you can actually see on a device that you get the feedback by looking at. Now it's app-based. So you can look at the app and you can see your heart rate variability based on their breathing techniques. And they give you cues if your breathing is matching the breathing, the breathing technique that you can actually moderate your heart rate variability and bring coherence to your heart rate variability using your breath. So I was introduced to heart math, and that really resonated with me. I immediately bought the device. I started learning about it, training on a daily basis. So that was like one step of learning for me and understanding. I started making that connection between my heart and this decade of the things that were happening in my life, but I still was tired. So I went looking for different doctors, and they did take me through another round of exams with the cardiology team, and everything else was functioning fine. 6 months later, I found an internist, an integrative internist who sat down with me and let me tell my whole story. She asked me lots of questions. She did. So she learned, she heard who is this person before me and what's happened in their life and where are they today? And then she said, let's do some labs. So she uncovered gut dysbiosis, a parasite, adrenal fatigue. And then together we decided what strategy do you want to take? These are your options. Here's a banquet of options. Choose one strategy and do one strategy for a while. And then let's see. Besides, we took care of the parasite and we took care of, we did some gut repair. And so I started really healing the fatigue, the deeper level fatigue by healing the gut, I chose acupuncture and traditional Chinese medicine. And the system started coming back to homeostasis. My hormonal issues, I was perimenopausal. My hormonal issues started, I would say I was still perimenopausal, but I wasn't having the symptoms. And I started bringing back homeostasis to my mind body system, the mind body through the heart math, and that making that connection, and then bringing the physical body along with it through the gut healing and just traditional Chinese medicine, getting the energy system in my body also functioning optimally. So I will pause. I've just said a lot. I'll let you speak. That was a lot.
I have so many things to say about it. Like so
Yeah.
many things. I I feel I have experienced so much of that same thing with my own health journey. Um, Not to say that Western medicine is not help. I think it is very essential. But I have experienced the same kind of treatment with a lot of doctors where they look at your labs and say, you're fine. You're fine.
Mm-hmm.
Everything's fine. Your numbers look fine. Everything's fine. When I'm not fine. And I have chosen myself
Mm-hmm.
never to go see an endocrinologist again out of my own choice. That is not for everybody. And I don't recommend it for everybody. I recommend everybody
Mm-hmm.
choose their own path. For myself, I have been to a number of endocrinologists. I will personally never go to one again because of my experience with them. Um, I feel that I have been treated as not a patient, not a person, but as numbers on a page. And it
Mm-hmm.
is very frustrating because, as you said, no one asks you about where you've been, what's your story, how are you feeling, what's been going on in
Mm-hmm.
your life. No doctor
Mm-hmm.
sits down and takes that time with you. The last endocrinologist I went to, and why I will never go again, I was in the office from the moment I walked in, paid, sat down, saw the nurse, saw the doctor, and walked out and sat in my car. I was there for 15 minutes and I
Wow.
cried. I sat in my car and cried because I was at a
Mm-hmm.
point where I was so low. I had been
Mm-hmm.
on thyroid medication for, at this point, 3 years now, and still felt
Mm-hmm.
so terrible.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sickening because you are at a point where you feel your worst. You
Mm-hmm.
feel awful and you are telling this person, I do not feel good, and they are shoving medicine at you, or they are telling
Mm-hmm.
you you're fine. Nope, everything looks fine.
Mm-hmm.
Everything looks fine, and you are telling them, I am not fine. This is not normal. And it's
Mm-hmm.
not. It's not normal. It's not normal to feel that way. And
Mm-hmm.
one thing you said was when you went and read, something by a female doctor. And what's interesting is that a lot of studies are done on men. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of they're getting better, but a lot of
Mm-hmm.
studies are done on men. They're not done on women. So I don't know
Mm-hmm.
that there's necessarily that heart connection. I don't know
Mm-hmm.
that. But I do know that even though our bodies are the same, our
Mhm.
physiology is the same, we all have the same systems, except, reproductive, obviously, but we don't necessarily react the same to certain drugs. We don't have the same um, emotional reactions. Obviously, our hormones are
Mhm.
different. So we have to treat things differently because we are still different. Even though when you come down to it, humans are humans, men and women are different. Emotionally, reproductively, hormonally, we are different. So I thought it was interesting that you did find that, and that the heart math is something that resonated with you. And it's, it doesn't, it doesn't go past me that it was a woman that, you know, did that.
Well, let me clarify. So the book was written by a female cardiologist, okay? But HeartMath is a research institute, and Doc Childre is the person who founded the research institute. So HeartMath isn't necessarily there are men and women. I mean, it's been
Sure.
around for decades. It's been
Right.
around for decades, but I just wanted to clarify that book that I read was a female cardiologist.
Right.
But HeartMath is not really, it was founded by a male, but there are men and
Not
women
that,
on their team.
right, right. Not saying that it's men and women, that it's different. I'm
Yeah.
just, saying to me, I think because they are different, and I'm sure that both men and women were in on this research as well, because, I'm sure of it. But there are a lot of differences, and you do need to do both. So I'm
Yeah.
sure that
Well,
it
I mean,
was.
I would posit that clinical research, actually, men and women's bodies are very different, specifically because of our hormones. And
Right.
so if you're, research for men is not appropriate to
Exactly.
apply to female. Yeah.
Right.
Which is what you were saying.
Yes. Yes. So
Mhm.
that was my whole spiel about it. So
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that that a female cardiologist is the one that wrote that. Not that the heart math is specifically for women. It was not what I was saying. Um, but that, a female cardiologist is the one that resonated with
Hmm.
you in that book.
Hmm.
Um, but yes, no, I think I do agree that it would be for both men and women. However, I think it's interesting that it is very different for men and women. It is very different for people to understand that you do have to go seek help in more than one way by more than one person as well. So not just taking one cardiologist's word for it. And I don't think people do that either. I don't think people seek more advice than maybe just one or two, and don't they just think, oh, this is just what I am, this is just what it is. And it's not that. And you have to go
Hmm.
and research and find more opinions until you can get the answers that you need to feel better. I
Yeah,
just
and I think that, yeah, I think our system, Gabby, that's this third party payer system where you have insurance in between the customer and the caregiver is really problematic
Mhm.
because, we're so disconnected from the cost, and yet we are held back because if we have insurance, then, well, insurance isn't going to pay for it. Seeking multiple opinions is really hard to get that paid for, and so most people just can't afford it. And
Yes.
I think that's one of the problems. And I want to, just for your listeners out there, I want to highlight this fact that you left the office crying. And I can tell you, Gabby, until I really had this strategy for healing from this deep fatigue. So when, that first year that you have a pacemaker, you're getting checkups regularly.
Hmm.
And every time I left my pacemaker checkup, and that first couple of years I was seeing the electrophysiologist regularly too. It was my case was a very unusual case because of my age. And so every time I left in tears, not in front of them, because honestly, my dignity meant something to me, because I even took him the heart math information. I gave him a book and he just slept it off. Like, stress has nothing to do with this.
Yep.
But every time I left in tears when I got back to my car, and I know that we're not alone in that. So what is it that we have this healing, supposed to be healing system in our culture, and we don't feel seen, we don't feel heard. And this idea that you were 15 minutes from beginning to end. And I have the privilege of living in another country. Granted, I afforded the best healthcare in Brazil. I want to preface that that's not what all Brazilians afford. They have public health system, but not everybody afforded the healthcare I received. But in Brazil, it was never less than an hour. I want, imagine it was never less than an hour, because they believed they needed to get to know you. Like, I would go for my pediatric visits with my children. We would be there for an afternoon. They would serve coffee, and, my kids would be in and out. She would meet with each one individually. And so I'm really on this mission to inspire people to really think about, what is the health care system that we have, and is it what we want? Is it a disease? I think it's a disease care, and it's not even a healing disease care. It's not even healing. It's just a pharmacological way of trying to treat people and tamper people down, if you will, just like not heal, but just, can we just keep the symptoms at bay enough that they won't come back, or that I don't have to treat them that much?
Yeah,
I think that's the real issue we're dealing with here in our system.
Yeah, I will even say, when I first got sick, I have Hashimoto's. When I first got sick, I wasn't even diagnosed by my primary care, because she only tested my thyroid, and I tested my thyroid twice, and it was within normal range. I was actually diagnosed by a naturopathic doctor.
Of course you were. I mean, your story, I know of course you were. I mean, what did she
but
test? TSH? Yeah. She
yes.
probably didn't do antibodies and all of that. Yeah.
And when I actually went on my path, and then I go to the endocrinologist, but I had health insurance. So I wanted to use my health insurance, because I was paying, $200 at the time, $200 a month for health insurance, and I had health insurance. So I wanted to go through my health insurance. And then it's like, you're still paying, $65 a visit, or, whatever it was. And then after 3 years, I'd paid so much money out of pocket, even though I had health insurance. It's like, well, now do I go to another naturopath, because I've already spent so much money, and now it's going to be $150 and it's not covered by insurance. And at the end of the day, it saved me money to go to somebody holistic, instead of going to another doctor that's just going to tell me I'm fine, because now I am healthy. I am normal, better than I was. I still have my ups and downs. I always will, but I'm not sick anymore. I'm not being told I'm okay. I'm not spending $65 to walk in the door for my doctor to just shove drugs down my throat. It's so frustrating.
I know. And,
just
the reality is we're not alone. And
right.
this is what is, a real concern of mine, is all the people who are not being served. And even, Gabby, if we look at what I also see that I think is a disservice, is in the holistic world, over prescribing supplements. So you've got prescriptions, but because we've got that model that we have to take something, on the holistic side, a lot of people think that they can supplement away symptoms. And you can't. You have to do the deep inner healing work, the mind body healing work. You can't, if you've got gut dysbiosis, until you deal with that, you're not even going to be utilizing those supplements. They're not going to be, your gut won't be metabolizing them. So, it's really interesting. We can go to the extremes and find how this system of popping a pill has influenced the way that we believe that we heal.
Yeah. And even with supplements too, I mean, even if you are on supplements, it's not something you may necessarily need to be on all the time forever either. It might be
Hmm.
something you need for a short period of time just to boost what, like vitamin
Hmm.
D, vitamin D may not be something you
Hmm.
need to be on all the time forever. I mean, it probably isn't
Hmm.
something you need to be on all the time forever. Maybe but um yeah, it is interesting. So you have a program called Vitality U. It's a holistic health roadmap is what it is.
Yeah, yeah. So it's really my coaching model. Vitally You is the framework, and it's the
Vitally.
process where
So
I. No, that's okay. It's the framework for how I look at a client who comes to me with health concerns. So it has to do with looking through the functional lens. So I do a full health history from pre-birth to current, and then I map it out on a my school's functional matrix where we look at antecedents, your genetic, what are the genetic components to your history? What were your triggers? So this is like full life. What are the things in your life that triggered some different symptoms that you've had? And what are the mediators? What are the things that make your symptoms better or worse? Then we look at all the systems of the body, including your mind spirit system and community, your musculoskeletal system, your digestive system, your hormones, your detox systems. We look at all those symptoms and where do your symptoms fall into the systems, because one symptom will impact multiple systems. And I know I've heard you say on your podcast before that it's all connected. Like you can't individuate out one area the way that we do medicine. And then we have the strategy. And so, this is a living document. And um, so the Vitally You, I really believe that you can feel younger growing older. That's my podcast, Vitally You, Feeling Younger Growing Older, because you can. Like look where you were when you were trying to figure out your thyroid issues and where you are today. If we can step into a different model and do the inner healing. So that's where I really believe in the mind body connection. So you really have to bring your belief system, your thoughts. You really have to look at what's my emotional experience, and then what's happening in the body, and you got to weave all of that together. And that really is the Vitally You program.
So if people wanted to find your program or find you, where did they do that?
Yeah, very easy. Through my website, I have a contact page. It's danafrost.com. I am active on Instagram, Dana Frost, Vitally You. I have my podcast, Vitally You. So any of those places, they could
Okay,
contact me. And an email is just dana@danafrost.com.
perfect. I'll definitely link that in the show notes so that they can have that. Is there anything you want to, oh, by the way, I love that. It's a living document. I think that was just the perfect, I love that. I think that's such a perfect sentiment because it is very much so. But is there anything else that you want to leave our listeners with today?
Yeah, I mean, I'll touch on that because, you know, as humans, this our body is nature. We come from nature and we are nature. And so nature is always changing. Like you said, Gabby, you said, you know, you have Hashimoto, like you feel really well. Sometimes you have a flare. We need to be gentle with ourselves and understand that, you know, we ebb and flow because life ebbs and flows. We have different stressors. We've got toxin stressors that we're exposed to. We go through a global pandemic, we have a work crisis, and then the body is going to be responding to all of this. And so it's very dynamic. This experience of being a human, it's very dynamic. And be gentle with yourself. And most of the time, it's not pushing forward, it's actually surrendering and just leaning back instead of like push, push, push.
Mm-hmm. Very much so. And I think you're right. Just like you said in the beginning that, we keep pushing forward and saying it's going to be okay. And, especially not even just as women, men do it too. And I think men are even
Mhm.
sometimes worse because they don't deal with emotions or deal with feelings the way women do. um, we just keep moving forward and not dealing or handling things the way we should. We don't move, just address it, like address what we're
Mm-hmm.
dealing with, address what's going on in life. We just keep going and push it down, push it down,
Mm-hmm.
push it down, and that affects us emotionally, affects us physically until we just can't do it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
deal with your
Yeah.
problems.
Okay. I'll say one more thing. The healing journey really, like, I had you, and I want, imagine. So I have the pacemaker implanted. I take my daughter to college 2 weeks later. I still have 4 kids at home. And I'll tell you what I had to do. And so if you're on a healing journey, you're going to have to make it a big focus of your life. Like, I ended up having to rest, take a nap every day for a year. I did acupuncture once a week for a year. And so sometimes you actually really need to let go of a lot of things and just focus on the healing journey.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
that's all I'll say. I'll leave it.
Yep. I'm right there with you. I believe in all of it. And acupuncture as well, I think is great. I think you have to take care of yourself in order to take care of everything else around you. So,
Mhm.
and in order to be physically healthy as well. So, thank you, Dana, so much for coming on the show. DanaFrost.com. I will have Vitally You linked on the show notes as well, so you can find her podcast also. But thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, everyone, for listening, and we will see you all next week.